All right, well, we might as well get started, and anybody who trickles in after this can just catch the beginning announcements later if they'd like. And of course, they're always posted on the Substack, so they're always easy to find. All right, now we're on to Freud. So this is our last class with Freud, so that's kind of wild and exciting. We've been through Freud's life now. We're going to talk about the end of his life. In the last class, we talked about the period immediately following the First World War. We looked at the establishment of Freud's free clinics, the tripartite system of psychoanalytic training, and how that got started. That's being supervised as you have patients in psychoanalysis, undergoing your own analysis, and studying psychoanalysis. Those are the three kind of components to becoming a psychoanalyst. And then we looked over the papers, The Uncanny, A Child is Being Beaten, Beyond the Pleasure Principle, and the cases of the Wolfman and the young homosexual woman. And now we're going to talk about Freud's works from group psychology, which is in 1921, until the end of his life. So let's get started, because there's a lot, as always. So it seemed like a process Freud was going through himself and a kind of reckoning at the end of his life. That's how I would look at it. All right. Marsfield Gardens is the name of the house where Freud ends up in London. It's in Hampstead, and it's a Freud museum where we're going to be giving the talk on June 4th. And you can go visit it if you're in London. Highly recommend. The furniture, antiques, and his famous couch are all there. Anna Freud had the study reassembled in London with fidelity to the original so that Freud could spend the remainder of his time surrounded by the objects he held dear. Freud continued to see patients while in London. The numbers were small and the hours were limited, but his clinical practice continued. Anna also had her own office at the house and continued her own clinical work there as well. 1939 brought the war that had been approaching for years. The Germans invaded Poland on the 1st of September, just a couple weeks before Freud's death. He was, by this point, largely confined to his study and the gardens of the house. He received visitors when he had the energy. He spent time with Anna every day, and he continued to read. The cancer of his jaw had spread to his cheek in a way that was now visible from the outside, and the pain which he had been managing for years through a combination of a prosthesis and analgesics was no longer manageable in the same way. He had throughout his illness maintained a position of considered refusal of pain relief that was stronger than very minimally necessary. He wanted, as he had told people over the years, to think clearly, even if it cost him comfort. And the clarity of mind was well worth the price of the pain to him. However, by September of 1939, that had changed. The pain was beyond what he could bear, and the relief available would cloud the clarity he had always protected. Freud had, years before, extracted from his physician, Max Schur, a promise that when the time came, he would not let him suffer beyond what was necessary. Schur had agreed. On the 21st of September, Freud decided the time had come and reminded Schur of his promise. Schur administered morphine and continued to provide further doses over subsequent days. Freud lost consciousness and died on the 23rd of September, 1939, at 3 o'clock in the morning, with Anna present. He was 83 years old. He had been living with cancer for 16 years. The cremation took place at Golders Green, and the ashes were placed in an ancient green urn from his own collection, which you see here. Martha Freud is also buried there. Anna, Marie Bonaparte, and Ernst Jones were at his funeral. Freud had survived war, plague, ruptures, bereavement, displacement, and had produced work that would outlive him, which is still inspiring and being debated to this day. What Freud left behind was not a settled system, but a set of productive disturbances. Ideas that generate argument and revision in every generation that encounters them, and cannot be simply adopted nor simply discarded. Practically everything in his oeuvre remains contested. The Oedipus complex, the death drive, penis envy. Moses most certainly was not Egyptian. None of this is quite the point. The point is that the questions he posed about human motivation, the relationship between individual psychology and collective life, the cost of civilization and the persistence of the irrational, the interpretation of dreams, and the impossibility of fully knowing oneself. These are questions that remain open and continue to inspire and aggravate generations in a most generative manner.